So the objective of this particular group is to focus in a little bit around source of hire, the challenges, the issues, what's happening, what you want to know. And let me just tell you one thing about myself. I view myself as a lifelong student of staffing. That's all you need to know. I'm really curious about learning and continuing to learn. I am passionate about a number of subjects. You heard one of my passions earlier today about the candidate experience, but I'm also kind of a geek around the issue of source of hire and have a number of opinions about it. But the only way I have those opinions is because I'm listening to people who are actually doing it and struggling with this issue and trying to make use of it. And so we have a great panel of characters. Now, these two you are, in fact, a practitioner working in enterprise right now, right?
Yes.
And I've known Ben for a long time. He's been in a lot of companies.
He's an expert
No,
job seeker.
let me say that differently. Ben has been a practitioner with a diverse experience in McGladrey, which was the fifth largest accounting. Marriott, which is kind of the retail side of hospitality. Now we also have some folks who have a variety of backgrounds, and currently are vendor suppliers, third-party consultants, and a variety of other things. And then there's Bill.
Former practitioner.
So here's what I'd like to do. I'd like to see if we can have a little bit of an interchange, not so much with the panel talking to each other or kind of spewing to you, but really to get a sense of what it is your interests are and having the panel respond to them. I can ask them a lot of dumb questions, but let's see if you have some interesting questions that really are relevant to what keeps you up at night.
Yeah, I promise not to spew,
so
Gerry.
Who is a practitioner who's sitting in this here? Okay. So you're a practitioner, and actually you're also a third party, so you do an RPO, so you actually manage a lot of folks out there who are recruiting.
That's correct.
Okay. And you have the additional problem of trying to figure out how to track source of hire clearly.
That is correct.
What is the one thing that keeps you up at night about this subject?
The initiating source.
Oh,
That's right. We're going to pass those things around.
Okay, so the probably the number one thing that keeps me up at night on the topic of source per hire is trying to get to the originating source.
Got it.
Not the source that someone applied to, but what drove them to apply to begin with.
Okay.
So I'd like your thoughts on that.
So, granted, and that's what we're going to try and do is stay focused on those kinds of things, as long as they don't get screwed up in the whatever. So, when you were with McGladrey, when you were with Marriott, et cetera, and I know Maister as well, I know you were capturing it. What were you doing?
Well, it's interesting. I kind of have have always had the inverse view of it. I've always gone with the but-for rule of what action but for had we not. So ultimately it could be, like many candidates have a number of different ways that they found out about us, but for what action did they take, to actually apply or, actually be considered by organization. But it was always a struggle. I mean, your ATSs don't make it easy. They give you one choice, which the candidate has to select. Now, in some cases, particularly when I was at Marriott, I implemented Taleo there. We tried to auto tag as much as we possibly could. So at least that way.
Did you try to address it though in terms of that one choice? So for example.
Yeah.
For example, in the ATS, would you force either the candidate or the recruiter, or whoever's filling in that field, to pick from a very specified set of originating sources rather than BS like, the last job board they were at?
Well, it was what was the source that you came from to apply for this particular role, or again, or it would be auto tagged.
But it doesn't tell them if there were 5 things impacting. It doesn't tell them which was the original.
No.
Okay. No. How about you, Bill? I'm gonna save you for last.
There's a couple of points I want to make on this, and that's the first thing that, and I've heard it a lot today. When most people are talking about candidates, they're talking about applicants. So I'm interested in two separate things: source of candidate and source of applicant. What attracted you to the brand? So what we've started doing over the last 12 months to try and address this problem is with 4 of the organisations that I work with, we actually track backwards. So we don't. What we're tracking backwards is using technology to say, okay, when because we're really interested in hires as opposed to general applications, because we felt that was more important. So we use some social sourcing data. I use the social CV, but there's quite a few of those that you can use to have a look at once we've hired someone. How long have they had a relationship, and where has that relationship taken place, and what interactions have they done? We also use LinkedIn Merlin data to have a look at that. So whose profiles have they looked at? What have they been doing? And the journey that we've noticed quite specifically is that generally somebody who's been attached with an organisation, have been connected with an organisation for a minimum of 9 months before they applied, which is pretty interesting. And they'll be connected in up to 40 touch points as they grow through to become an applicant, which is the difference, I think, between a candidate and before applying. And the reason we wanted to do that was that all of the work we were doing in social recruiting, actually, when you look at source of hire, was looking like it was failing miserably, because we weren't getting applications from the sources. People were then ultimately going to a career site, and we needed to show influence. So really looking for the return of influence and tracking backwards when did the hires follow us on Twitter and so on.
I'm going to get back to you.
You're getting the hook.
I'm going to push. That's all.
Great.
So your turn.
Great. So just way of background, I spent many years at Lehman Brothers in campus recruiting, global
what I
and
wanted.
regional roles.
Okay, cool.
And I was most recently the global COO of campus recruiting at Credit Suisse, now at WCN, which is an ATS, among other things, for campus. But one thing that I, as a practitioner, always tracked was not just the source, but what was the most influencing thing to the candidate that made them want to apply? So a lot of times I would ask the students, and whether it was in the ATS or the recruiter or whatever it was what got you here? And yeah, you can do the auto tagging and whatnot, and whether you have a couple, rate the things that got you here, and because I don't think just one in most cases, but also what influenced you the most? Was it a professor? Was it an ad in a newspaper? Probably not. But those types of things I found most valuable when I would start to set my marketing strategy the following year. What influenced
Let
me
me
the
ask you a
most?
question
Yeah.
about ATS.
Yeah.
Would you, in your review of different kinds of ATS
Mm-hmm.
tools, have you seen any that offer the capability of configuring an initial source and then maybe a secondary source, or a source that's based on the highest influence, or a source that's original source, or something along those lines? Do any ATSs offer analysis that allows for you to better configure that part of their tool, or do they just give you the default BS of some random set of sources?
Yeah, so you're setting me up here a little bit to say, of course, the WCN, but that was one of the reasons why I chose WCN at Lehman and Credit Suisse globally, because I could have the main source, the sub-source, it was sort of whatever I wanted, whatever my team globally wanted to do, because of course each region and division may want
Of course,
separate
somebody has
different
to help
things.
them figure that out,
Yes,
that they need to do that.
Exactly, and
Right.
so we put in all different types of things.
When you
And
set up
very much
the ATS
configured.
for
I
Marriott,
don't know
did you-
about the,
did you do
others,
that?
but-
Well, we had the main source and sub-sources, but I think it's how you phrase the question,
Yeah.
and that's really where we were able to, and that's how we were able to get to that. But
He needs to had a shot at that.
real quick, certainly at McGladrey, we went after the influencers as well. We did that through our candidate surveys, and actually for our campus hires, we had a very high volume of responses to those candidate surveys, because for campus, for me, the source is the university. Okay, but what I want to know is, did they go to our blog? Did they go to our Facebook page? Did their professor influence them? That's what I was just as much interested in. We get to that through our surveys.
Okay.
Just one other thing, just around the
Yeah,
source
yeah.
with events. So much of when we're going on campus, we're doing a million events. It's that funnel. You have your big, one firm presentation down to, a small dinner.
And what you're raising is that the the configuration of sources for college is going to be very different than the
very
source
different.
configuration for
Ex-
almost any other group.
Exactly, and being able to track, hey, this candidate came to 10 events, and we ultimately maybe we went to this, or maybe I had an event and I only hired, people ultimately into, one division, and the other divisions there was no one who we hired. So maybe next year I'm going to tailor that event to the asset management division of my bank, and you know what, IT, we have to do something
Okay,
different.
enterprise.
Those types of things.
What are you doing?
Okay, Dylan Schweitzer with Enterprise. Often we're looking, there's typically 3 or 4 sources that the candidate is coming from that we can track. So,
Do you track 3 or 4 sources?
yes and no.
Okay.
So the way we can track it is there's a digital entry. So if the candidate sees a banner or something, we've got a back-end digital entry of the candidate having
Okay.
seen one of our ads.
But that's typically the
That's-
last thing.
That's
before they
behind
get
the
to
scenes.
you.
It may not be the last last thing. It could be the front end.
Got it.
As long as they're applying using the same device that they saw us online, we can track that data. So we've got that. Then we've got
It
one sec. Then I've
depends
got
on when you begin tracking, though, doesn't
that's
it?
it does, yes.
Okay.
Then we've got the candidate self-identifying. This is my source. So their self-identified source could be something else. So it could be they saw our ad on Career Builder, but they also saw us on Monster, and they think that they saw us on Monster, and that's why we have both. So we've got the self-identified. You've got the actual data that proves where they came from. Then we've got the candidate, the recruiter, who goes through the questionnaire saying, hey, where did you come from and how many different places did you see us? So we're getting all this information. And so, I saw you at the college. And then sometimes in the process, we get a message from one of our employees that says, hey, Johnny's interviewing and Johnny came from me. And so we've now got a 4th source. The problem is we've got a referral program where we're paying the employee, so they now are expecting a fee when we're like, well, we've got these 3 other sources that it didn't come from you. So there is a lot that goes behind it. I actually wanted to join this session to find out how everyone else is tracking it because it's not an easy thing, but from our recruitment standpoint, we realize that we've got to approach all of these angles to attract a candidate. I've got to go to the college, the
There's
referrals.
not a silver bullet, but the
there is none.
reality is I don't see any corporation doing much more than what you're doing. Some are statistically taking a look at how they can factor a variety of different things, but if you don't collect more than one thing, you're going to have trouble with the factor analysis of that, that's for sure. So I'm convinced that we're going to increasingly look at the degree of influence, because we know that increasingly you're going to be able to ask almost any candidate and say, did you use social media in any way during your recruiting process? And they go, yeah, after I saw the ad, first thing I did was call my neighbor who I know works for you.
Before they saw it.
Even or before. So the point is, if you're not collecting all those pieces, you have no way of identifying where the originating piece was, and yet it may not be as important as knowing what the factors are that influence the next step, the action. Because seeing the ad, even if it's the original, may not have been sufficient unless something else happened as well. That was some kind of branding or something they saw from a friend or whatever it might be. What did you want to say there, Bill?
Sorry, I had a question.
There is a question, I think. But the point I'd really like to make is a lot of what I'm hearing is still really old man technology.
Yeah.
It's still old fashioned. It's still asking people to provide you with data when you no longer need to do that in most cases. So actually asking for questions, surveys, forms, interview collection, that kind of stuff, it is an improvement, but actually most of the time we can track everything. We can track everything. We can look at everything.
Track that call that they made to their neighbor.
Would they,
Yeah.
well,
Yeah.
no. Well,
NASA can. So there's a couple
actually,
companies that are really good at that.
actually, Gerry, I would say for a lot of things, we're making 2 assumptions there. Number one is that they've seen an ad that triggered them to make a call before they applied. Generally, that's not what's happening. that opinion's made before they end up there. I think the second thing is that actually we can see relationships, we can see where people are connected, we can see where they followed us, we can see what content they looked at, we can see what they liked, we can see what they did. We have a path we've never had before. So to rely on opinion and questionnaire is kind of
Well, I think it's confirming.
Something.
I 100% agree with you. I 100% agree with you that most companies are not using the sophistication of the tools that often were developed in marketing to be able to accomplish some of this, and we should be
well,
applying.
they can tell you a customer journey. Right? So
Customer journey.
if I go to a customer, if I go to a marketing department or consumer department of an online retail, they will tell me the customer journey. They will tell me when they first looked at something, when they first looked at the site, what they did, where they went, and where they went with that. As soon as we get in recruiting, we just don't apply the
should
same
at least
thinking.
get to that level. And if we get to that level and there's some other things that are still missing, we can get them.
Yeah, I think you had
Yeah.
a question.
I'll get it. I got it. I got it. That's my job. All right. I don't know if we're going to get better than that.
All right, so I've got a couple of observations, and I've
Yeah.
got a unique perspective.
Yep.
I own a 13-year-old human resources outsourcing and consulting firm, and we actually do a substantial amount of recruiting. We've got over 300 positions we're helping clients fill right now. And I made a decision last year, hopefully one I don't regret, of buying a 21 job board network in the Northeast. So as a job board owner, I can tell you with all due respect, I would love for all of you to go talk to and convince all of my clients that what you are saying is correct, because they don't believe it. Because their view of what we do is all tied to whether or not someone has applied for the position through my site. And on the HR consulting side, I know one of the things we do is we do outplacement, and we help our clients figure out how to job seek. And we tell them the last thing they should do is wind up in front of someone like me, the gatekeeper on HR. They should go to LinkedIn after they've seen the job, and they should find someone they're connected to, and they should figure out a way how to get in through the side door or the back door, every place but the front door. So with that being, I think, the prevailing theory, clients can only be shown circumstantial evidence these days. They can be shown impressions, they can be shown traffic, but as far as applicants are concerned, most educated applicants don't click apply, at least through my board. They may be through larger employers, they may be through your applicant tracking system when you're a larger company. But the other piece is that my business, my clients are mostly companies with less than 200 employees. They have no applicant tracking system. They have an email address. And it's a question of how where the email came from. And if they have a website, the person's going to the website and figuring out the list of people in the management team. And if it's a marketing job, they're sending it to the head of marketing. We have all this great circumstantial evidence, and we have branding evidence to show that they're getting themselves out there, but we don't have direct correlated evidence that says Bob found his job through you. And the other reason why is because nobody cares to ask these people during the interview. They don't care. They just are happy to see the person. They don't want to go through that exercise of asking them 100 questions. Did you see it this way? But did you see it here? Did you see? They don't do that. The person shows up, they're interviewed, they're overwhelmed in many cases with so many candidates that they don't want to have that extra
So let me
step
ask you
two.
specifically, since you have a lot of recruiters doing recruiting, do you, when the candidates come in, do you have a script that's a disciplined script to collect data to confirm what might be the journey that we've learned digitally, to see if that journey, in fact, is replicated by what they're saying or what you're learning from them through this disciplined approach to collecting that data?
Jerry, we have 700 clients, and we probably on the recruiting side consistently have over 150 to 200 a year. I can only think of 3 who've actually point to ask us to ask the candidates how they found out about the job.
So you do this because the client is willing to pay you to do that?
Because
as
our whole
opposed to-
model's hourly. So the
Got
more
it.
time it takes for me to get to a point where I can present them,
them? I get it.
so it's driven by
So you do
that.
it where the client is bright enough, if you will, to ask you to confirm some other piece of data.
And they're also going on our recommendation. We're recommending where they should advertise. And as a ethical business owner, I mostly recognize that the best board is not my board. It may be Indeed, it may be Monster, it may be Career Builder, it may be an industry association site. I have to do what's in the best interest. It's a very interesting position to be in, to have to kind of split yourself down the middle that way.
So what I hear is there isn't one way that people get to a company, that measuring which one might be the most influential and or tracking their journey, whether it be digitally or through some other mechanism, some old-fashioned mechanism, is not a simple process. It's not easy to do it. It may not be rocket science, but it requires a significant amount of discipline. There is a cost to accomplish that. And it seems to me that from a scientific point of view, you'd love to have at least two versions, two ways of looking at that piece so that you can confirm it to increase the reliability as well as the validity of it. So ideally, it's not easy to do this, but fundamentally, the question is, if we move into an era of big data, and if, you know, what comes in
big
is
data,
only as good as what
no,
goes
no.
out, we're going to have to figure out how to get good data more effectively, particularly on the source issue. Yeah. Yep. What do you have? Thank you.
Hi, thank you. Björn from Potential Park. No, I just had a very small question to start with. It was basically on
We'll make it very big after.
Yeah, no, it got bigger as time went by, but it was just on cookies from you from Enterprise on if you use cookies to see a longevity of time. But then also when it comes to this, I think that a lot of the things like the call you mentioned to the cousin who works at the company. I mean, referral systems are very important, but that call, I mean, is it really important to measure? Because what we try to measure is the actual effectiveness of our jobs. Are we doing the right things? And that person calling that same person's cousin, that's not really our job. It's our job to facilitate a referrals program where that is picked up by the cousin to say, I want to call you. That's something else. But the only things that we can do is to measure the things that we do in order to get the candidates into the application process. And then that leads to that when they are in the application process, they're already there. So what we've been seeing a lot in our research is that when they are already in that process, they're not accepted, or they are just, you know, they're at the start of their career with the company, they're biased somehow because they want to say, yeah, I've known your company for years. It was my personal interest. And I made it my personal interest, and then it becomes a long story that can be a lot of what you would call BS, I guess. But it's a new terms for me.
So
But
what's your question?
I think my question boils down to talent communities.
Got it. Okay.
To see if you stop looking at the applications only, but bring in the talent community, not the talent pipeline or the talent pool, but actually the community, and see that as a valid kind of.
We started talking about that in your session, and you really wanted to get from the audience. I could tell. Zen or not, you were really wanting from this audience a sense of that community issue, and when you say community as opposed to pipeline, as opposed to whatever, what are you describing? Because I think this is important.
Yeah, no, I mean,
it is an extraordinary potential source for relationships, if you can build relationships. We're all talking about how do I build relationships prior to, and how do I figure out how much prior to, so that I don't spend too much money building relationships and not enough money hiring people to put in jobs. So when you think about building a community, what would be an example of that?
I mean, there's a lot of talent communities, I mean, plug-in systems that exist, and also the companies that build their own Facebooks. There's, I think it was KPMG or something, or Deloitte in France, built their own Facebook just for having a community. But basically, it's the old type of thinking of a talent.
Those would be an example of a community for you.
Yeah, yeah. Okay. I mean, it's not the official process of applying, and you have to answer everything, but just being in a pile, and then also on top of that being the communicative aspect.
An important interim step for sourcing, that you get people into a community, and then at some point you would use that as a means to build a relationship, so you'd make the transition from the community into the corporation more easy. Is that
I think
kind of
it's
where you're going?
no. Where I'm going is it's an interesting question to ask
Yeah.
to the panel to see whether talent communities
That's where-
is a
okay.
way to
Is
get
that
more
where we're
data
going?
into this.
Yes, please, I'd like to.
Which one wants to go first?
It's a hot topic for me because I think probably, in my opinion, 90% or more of what you see out there is being referred to as talent communities are not a community at all. They are job spam machines. Okay. And I don't believe that you necessarily need to spend a lot of money on building one of those out when, kind of to your point, Facebook can be a very good community. I mean, Ernst & Young here in their building has had a fantastic following for years. They were the ones who started that for careers, particularly around college recruiting. Marriott just surpassed 1 million followers for the Marriott Jobs and Careers Facebook page. They engage people. To me, engagement is the key to a community, and having a conversation is key to the community. And that's typically a lot of what you don't see in a lot of these products that are put out there touting themselves as talent communities. You need to have that interaction in order to truly have a community where people can learn more about you. You can engage with actual people, whether it's in a chat or just responding to questions that people bring up, having a variety of media out there to educate people and people can respond to and comment
So
to.
you see this as a strong future source.
For companies that are willing to go through the effort
Yep.
to do that.
Got it.
These things, you can't just turn something like that on and have it run itself. These things actually require interaction by the recruiters and probably even beyond the recruiters, the employees that aren't recruiters to get involved with that and provide their own perspective and that kind of behind the scenes day in the life
Okay,
view.
you can jump in.
I think virtually everything we've just talked about is not really a community, in my opinion. And it always seems like semantics, but I think
So
the,
how would you
the
define
definition is quite important. I think a community is 360 in which any member can speak to each other. And which means
buy that, by the way.
you're not putting. And generally, what we're talking about when we talk about community, no less valuable, by the way, but is a talent network. If it's a case of the organisation talking to the person, and there being a definition in that, it's not a community, because it means and that's a lot of what
Enhanced
people
database.
talk about. Yeah, and it's really valuable, but it is a talent network. It's one way. You only really get talent communities in places where either where the topic is bigger than the hiring. So things like Marvin Smith at Microsoft and now Lockheed Martin done a fantastic job, but that's because engineers want to talk to engineers about engineering stuff and have a route to the job if they want it. It does mean you can take the data though and target the right people. So it's got a place, but I think unless it's 360, it's not a community.
Bill is referring to a fellow by the name of Marvin Smith, who was with Microsoft, now is with Lockheed Martin, and one of his projects in the last 6 months has been to pre-select hundreds of people who do not yet have a job at Lockheed Martin, but to tell them that you have the qualifications to have that job, and when those jobs come open, you will get them, and then keeps them warm by putting them into
A network. I'd say that's a network,
where
not
they
a
can
community.
talk to each other, and they all know that they've already have a job. They're in line, if you will, which takes away some of the problem of I'm competing with this person for a job. I've got the job, right? It's just that the job has not come open yet for Lockheed. We have to win another whatever. So I think there's some interesting experiments going on that are attempting to get to the next level that fit that framework. What are you doing at Enterprise? Do you have a talent community? What do you do with these kids? Call it that. What do you call
it? I don't think we call it that, but I love the term. We've got the Facebook thing going on, and all of the recruiters in our teams have Twitter accounts, and they're tweeting out, and they're trying to get followers, and they're following all the schools, and we've got all these things going on. But for us, it's all about the relationship with the students. And so, you can talk about the community and all this stuff behind the scenes, but if I don't get one-on-one with that person and tell them about the culture at my company and tell them about what a wonderful place it is to work and why they'd want to be there, none of all this stuff works. For us in particular, because I think it's challenging from the outside when somebody thinks, gosh, do I really want to, did I go to college to rent cars? You know, you go to Lockheed Martin, it's like, wow, you know, that's amazing. But we have such an incredible story to tell. The problem is I have to personalize it to tell you that story.
But I would argue.
So it's a different obstacle that I'm facing that some of these other organizations have from a name perspective.
I would argue, though, that you do create communities because you have recruiters who are responsible for a number of different campuses. Many of those recruiters, not all of them and not in every instance, but the recruiter will go on campus and they will adopt, in effect, a chapter of young business, whatever.
They do.
Right?
Yeah.
And you guys specifically target that. And without necessarily focusing in on the hiring, they help them think about and deal with the content around what their future is about, what starting a new business is about. And yeah, they want to hire them, you know, the best of the brightest in the end, but what they're investing in is content openly that helps those folks talk to each other in a more professional manner and think more effectively about what they want to do next. And in my opinion, that starts to get into the definition of a community. It's just not all focused on online kind of stuff. It's done campus by campus. They have the resources, though, to be on 1,000, right, approximately, 1,000 campuses. So community doesn't have to be online. It can be otherwise. And I'm convinced that every one of these folks are saying that the future in sourcing will have, that community will have a strong value there.
I just want to talk about
Yep.
community. No one's talking about using university alumni. From my end, I use it constantly. I have several LinkedIn communities. I have one in career services. I have one in the business school. I look at the level of the person. I do this almost quite frequently. And what company I work with, and they get them to get me to human resources. And you guys can do the same thing. If you have, and we have plenty from enterprise, you know, we've worked with, having those people be the ambassador. We don't use ambassadors to talk about your company and their experience with your company and to connect to career services and make this happen in student groups. I mean, that is the cheapest and most effective way than a lot of all this other stuff that costs you so much money and doesn't give you the same payoff.
So building some kind of connection through the alumni association.
Not alumni, but alumni. It doesn't have to be the I don't do it through the alumni association, but I have a career page with alumni on it, you know,
Okay.
and they can network with them. And the business school has their own group. There's like three. In other words, if you gave me a task, I'd have 5 or 6 groups that I can connect to get you to those people.
Are there any financial services people here? No?
I can
I was
speak
gonna
to
say,
financial
you know,
services.
From Gladry, from whatever.
Yeah, I can speak from
That's
that
the
side.
group that knows how to mine and has
Yeah.
been doing it for dozens of years.
Yeah.
Their alumni body, right?
Yeah, well, I can just speak from, you know, past experience at Lehman Brothers and Credit Suisse. You know, I called it a passionate alumni program, which was, you know, I won't tell you what the acronym was because we didn't love, you know, PAP. But, you know, the idea was, I know, sorry, was to let's find, you know, those passionate alumni within Lehman Brothers at the time, or, you know, now Credit Suisse, who are not at the core schools that we're going to, right? But they love their school. Everyone wants to go to their unit, and they have the relationships with the career service professionals, the professors, and get the referrals that way, and, you know, start to mentor those candidates and bring them through our non-core, you know, virtual process, if you will. And that's, you know, you talk about low-cost sourcing and personalizing the process and coaching these kids, and they perform just as well as the, you know, Harvard, you know, I can say this as I'm a Columbia MBA student, or alumni, so it's okay for me to sort. They perform just as well as Ivy League, so it's you know, and that's a piece, the passionate alumni. Yeah, I mean, I've done the analysis on it, so absolutely.
So the rest of you out there, what is it that, you know, you're in this session, what is it that you would want to know about source of hire that we haven't talked about yet, and in the few minutes that are left, would be of interest to you? Yeah. It's okay.
At the risk of being redundant, so what? So with the understanding of what today's job seeker is all about and about how they operate. Maybe the question is, are you able to successfully sell internally the idea that you need to be recruiting as more of a branding exercise versus a direct ROI? Can you sell recruiting to your customers like Tide sells its advertising to its internal sales team, where Tide has no idea the reason I bought their product or the fact that it happens to be on a shelf I pass by at Costco when I go through there every couple of weeks and my wife says, buy Tide, she trusts the brand. Can you sell it as a branding exercise and not as direct ROI?
Who wants to take that? Go for it.
As it relates to campus directly, I think anybody I send on campus better get it. But I'm gonna train them. I'm gonna train them on the messaging. What messages do I want delivered? What are we looking for? A lot of times you send a manager back on campus, they know what they're looking for, but they may not know what the rest of the company's looking for. They may know what the culture's like on their team or in their department. They may not get it for the rest of the organization. So if anybody I'm sent on campus, I'm gonna be darn sure that they're fully aware and trained and prepared with the full all the branding material that's possible to go out there and be a part of it. But also, I want to engage them in it. Okay, and this is where I think I was going to make a point earlier that I think it's a combination, particularly with campus hiring, of both kind of old school and new school. It's getting the alumni involved. It's the personal relationships that you build, but it's also getting out there virtually. And the more that I can engage those managers, those people doing in the marketing itself, having them write blog posts, have them be tweeting about or engaging on my Facebook page and out there and sharing their perspective. Ultimately, that's who candidates want to hear from more. They want to hear from that manager or their peer, their potential peer, much more than they want to hear from me. Okay. Yeah. So my answer is they need to be a part of the marketing, and I believe I can sell them on that.
Okay, just pass it on down so each of you get a chance.
My view always on the branding and marketing is there's sort of, if I think about events, just to take one slice of the pie, to me there's two types of events when you're doing campus recruiting. There's those branding events. It's just you're building your brand. You may not actually talk to the students there or get to know them or have any information on them to help decide if you want to interview them. So that's brand, and then there's those ones where you're having, a small little, brown bag lunch or, resume workshop where you're trying to teach them, aside from career services, I'm looking for the career service folks in the room, that piece. And then you're really interacting with them. So to me, there's two pieces of the puzzle. It's both on campus. It can't be one or another, and you can't separate it out. So to me, that's always been, okay, where are we spending our money? Some of it's going to be on branding, and we're not going to tie it exactly to that straight ROI, and that's okay. But the other piece, you can track that pretty well.
It's interesting that you talked about Tide, actually, because I have done some work with Unilever, so I kind of see the way that they work from a marketing point of view. I think that the key point, there's three things here. One is the role of the recruiter is changing significantly, and it's going to fall into one of three schools. There are going to be those people who will emerge as super recruiters. There'll be much more about, within the organisation, branding and influence of what's going on. They're going to be in the minority, but we're already seeing those people emerging, being a lot more influential within the organisation. The second group will be about talent networks, so they'll be about attracting people to the organisation rather than specific roles, and hiring managers are doing a lot more of their own the hiring part of it. Recruiters are doing less and less interviewing and more and more attraction, which is the branding piece. The third bit is a lot of recruiters are ending up doing the admin and process of it, getting stuck in the admin and process. So I think from an organisational point of view, what you're going to see is more and more hiring managers and hiring heads of teams are getting direct KPIs and responsibility for recruiting. And the more that they get that, the more they're looking to other people to do more of the branding. So, and that's going to change pretty quickly. I think you'll see that within 18 months, the role of recruiter will be a completely different one.
Okay. Thank you.
We have our recruiters get it. They get it right away. And I've got the data that shows it takes 2 years to build a brand on a campus at a minimum. So the challenge lies in the people who are signing the checks and approving the budgets and convincing them. And at this point, we've got the data that says, hey, it's going to take 2 years, and let's talk about what it's going to cost at each campus and how much time it's going to take. And that's the frustrating thing, I think, for a lot of the vice presidents is they're seeing that the recruiter's not in the office. They should be in the office doing interviews. Well, you're not going to get the interviews if you don't have the candidates. How do you get the candidates? You got to be on campus. How much time is that? And translating, what's the time, what's the money, you know, and how does it work, and how much should we spend? So that's a harder sell, but they get it. We have data, and they get it when someone at a higher level, like myself or someone else, comes in and says, hey, let me show you why, and spends half an hour explaining, you know, how it works. But if their recruiter just comes to them and says, hey, I need $5,000 for this school, without giving them any of this information, it gets shot down. And then my job is much harder because they come to me and they say, hey, I got shot down for this $5,000. And then I've got to go and I've got to sell twice as hard to explain it. Whereas we should have approached it with, hey, let me show you some numbers. Let me show you what it's going to take, how much time, how much money to build a brand. And it really takes 2 years, sometimes 3, to really get that return on investment.
Yeah.
But you
Let me just give you
But I've got the data.
final
In God
final
we trust,
comment.
everyone else brings back.
because we're approaching the end at this point, is one of the things we have not talked about, and it's really because it's partly a different subject, but I think we would be remiss if we didn't mention it, is that the number one source of hire, 40% of most of the openings that are filled in almost every company of any size are internal employees, is the number one source of hire. We're here talking about college campus, but you need to really think about that because there are some significant shifts that are going on. So Intuit, for example, has now allowed their recruiters to recruit first from their own employees. And they've eliminated any requirement of how long an employee must stay in a job. So there's some really interesting radical notions about that. But when you apply it to college campus, what you really are talking about is the extent to which your interns, that you've spent an enormous amount of time, money, and effort building a pipeline, hopefully building a community for them, allowing them to engage each other after they go back to their colleges, perhaps over and over again. They become an extraordinary potential source long-term for almost any company when we talk about the college side. What's your conversion rate of those that you want? And if you're not getting 100% of those that you want, then you really need to understand why, because whatever other source that you're looking for, you're going to compound the problem. These are the people that know you best. These are the people that you know best, and supposedly you've developed the best relationships with. So if you don't start with where your strength is, you're going to have a hard time translating that to some of the other sources that are less valuable. So if we would, I'd appreciate it if you would help me thank this panel and yourselves. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Gerry.
My pleasure.